forgot to write a bio. Fuck. The only man I'd turn gay for, Gough. Enjoy.
Cheers. I did forget to submit a bio, and last night at dinner he said he was going to say that. So that's kind of my own fault there. How freaking good is Jess Herrera? If anyone should not have imposter syndrome, it's her. So I'm the founder of a small studio called Dirty Puppet, and we're very lucky that we get a real diverse range of briefs and projects that we get to work on. But at the core of that, a lot of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis involves characters. And for anybody who knows me or who has worked with me, you'd know that I have a real fond passion for character animation and specifically character rigging. And it turns out I'm also quite good at rigging competitions to win particles for our studio. I feel really terrible about that, and I'm going to give it away. So I really enjoy character rigging. It's an interesting kind of culmination of creative process and technical and coming together. And when done right, it allows you really good choices as an animator to make good dynamic performances for your characters. So I wanted to start off by showing the oldest showreel I have on file under the pseudonym of Dirty Puppet. So this is around about 2007. It's pretty embarrassing showing it here, but I think it's great to kind of do things like that. When I initially downloaded it, it was in 640 by 480 resolution, which shows you how old this was. But I was initially heavily inspired by a lot of motion graphics kind of earlier studios, such as Lobo, Shinola, and MK12. And a similar time to making the body of work here, I saw a talk like this. I think it was a semi-permanent, and I saw one of the presenters from MK12 talk. I think it was Ben Raditz. And MK12 and those other studios, they were like kind of rock star studios to me. I had such a kind of big idea of what they are and the sort of work that they do. And then when I saw Ben talk, he was quite clumsy and awkward and a little bit disorganized, probably like me today. But then, if anything, it kind of made, it kind of took down those the sort of barrier between the work that they did and maybe the work that I did. Also, they were showing, he showed some behind the scenes stuff and some green screen footage that they used, and it was just them in their studio using shitty cameras and doing it in ways that were, how I would do it. So kind of seeing the accessibility of how they kind of broke down their work all of a sudden made it very accessible to me, and I found it quite inspiring. So hopefully I'll be doing something similar today where I'll show you some of the processes that we do, and it inspires some people to do good work. On my old showreel, at least initially, almost all of the work was created entirely by me, most of it anyway, and almost stubbornly so. And this was kind of good for being able to communicate to studios as a freelancer what I could or couldn't do. But I was also really limiting the scope of the work that I could and wanted to achieve. I'd also kind of consciously branded my showreel as Dirty Puppet instead of Cameron Gough, because I wanted to have that ambiguity to maybe build it into an animation studio or attract the sort of work that I really wanted to do. But I couldn't do this alone. And thankfully at the time I'd started running a co-working space. And from that co-working space, I got to work alongside and meet a lot of other really good talented people. I was also a recent grad, so I had a lot of other talented people who were also other juniors. And they had diverse skills to mine. And I thought I wasn't quite reaching the peak of quality of work that I wanted to in different attributes, but I thought I was quite good at maybe seeing skills in other people and be able to bring that together to create work that would be better than what I could do alone. This is one of the first kind of junctures in my career and kind of and for Dirty Puppet, and I like to do this from time to time, where I take a step back and look at our folio of work and maybe assess what's lacking or kind of where I want to push the work to. And coming from a motion graphics background, there's a lot of crossover between motion graphics, animation, and character animation. But truthfully, character animation is quite a different beast. The way the animation principles and the weighting and the way it all works is quite different, and something I felt that I really wanted to try and do a lot more of. I did have a bit of imposter syndrome myself at the time because I was surrounded by really talented people, some of which were already established character animators. I had other friends who were working on movies and things like that sounds cool and is cool. And so I felt like a bit of a fraud, but I just wanted to push through that and give it a go. Everyone else has been giving their own sound designers their own props today. I just want to give mine one. So Nick Van Kylenberg runs White Owl Sound in Collingwood here. He works a lot with us. He's my best friend. He works a lot with Jimmy from Yes Captain, and he's really awesome. So maybe give him a crack too. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, so fast forward maybe, I guess, 12 years on from that older showreel, which is crazy. Anyway, so now our showreel is the fruits of many people's work, and hopefully there's still a diversity of work in there, but as you'll see, there's probably predominantly characters. Even more so on a day-to-day basis, the sort of work we do is just largely with characters. We're potentially at a new juncture now where I'd say there's maybe not a huge lack of external awareness for our capabilities for 3D work and 3D character work, which is something that we're trying to maybe push towards now. So I'm obviously into character rigging and the tools that go into it and everything to do with that. But I kind of just wanted to have a few sort of little pointers before jumping into it and maybe glorifying it a little bit too much. So the technology of everything that we use is constantly changing, from plugins to the software to moving into augmented reality and all that sort of stuff. And so one thing that I've kind of always wanted to focus on is animation and design principles and not the technology. Obviously, doing rigging or doing animation in general is a real marriage of these two things, but I'd like to kind of not get too hung up on stuff because it's constantly replaceable, and if you focus your craft on the quality of movement that can be applied to anything or any tool, and it's something that we try and do in our studio. All of our rigs that we do on projects are generally built from scratch. There's no kind of one-click solution for it all, or automatic walk cycles or anything like that. But just touching on a couple of the tools that we do use for good and bad. So Joysticks and Sliders is a really great plugin. It's essentially just, I'll show more examples of it later, but with it has there's increased accessibility to shortcutting a lot of rigging processes, which is really great, but then you see a lot of people potentially skipping steps of the animation principles, and all of a sudden they can create a character head rig, but maybe they don't know how to animate it appropriately. Rubber Hose 2 is similar. That kind of really found a spot for something that was lacking in After Effects a couple of years ago, and it's a great rigging tool for really simple mostly kind of limbs, but also other things. But with that, then there's a sort of onslaught of people creating noodly character rigs and sort of a bit of derivative work hanging around there. So yeah, and then last of all, Duick, Puppet Tools, Limber, and a whole bunch more. We touch on these all the time and we use them a lot. But if people are using them the wrong way, you'll see a lot of like squished limbs or people creating walk cycles that have slipping feet and kind of things like that really kind of irk me. So we use all these tools and we love them and embrace them, but I think people jump in a little bit too quickly because process videos and tutorials and things like that, they really get a lot of likes and traction online, probably more so than the actual creative work itself. So yeah, it's definitely more a product of how the tool is used and not the tool itself, though. Yeah, so before I show a couple of examples here and another couple of places I'll need to put this little slide up here. So we did a collaboration with an amazing comedy group called Auntie Donna. And when I was putting together this little rig sample here, I was scrambling for voiceover samples to use, and you'll know why in a sec.
And I swear to fucking God, I have to show him this bullshit every 2 or 3 a week. He cannot learn how to delete the history on a Chrome. Just by, it's so fucking easy.
It's a nice voiceover sample from, yeah. It's not me, but thanks, yeah. That was the voice of Mark Bonanno from Auntie Donna, and he's great, and they're great, and you'll see more from them later. So this is a sample. I wanted to show some of the tools we use, but more so how we use them, and just to show a bit of that process. So this is a rig that I've created for today. This little thing moving around right now is Joysticks and Sliders, and as you can see, it's essentially just averaging out different values that you set. So in this example here, you can see there's 5 different poses that I've set for the character, and it's typically used for head rigging. So seeing how that little top stick there moves around, you'll see it kind of in betweens and allows you to very easily move this around. So again, you can use this for anything, but it is often used for heads. On the right-hand side here, you'll see some references for different mouth shapes that we use. They're probably not awesome. They're just what we use, and we use them on one of our longer form jobs ages ago and just stuck with them. And me and the people who work with me have just memorized the numbers now, so they're not amazing. But with this little thing that's ticking up here is another joystick. But one thing we like to do is try and keep the workspace simple. And so we'll often link secondary controls to the rotation of that stick there. So all that's happening is we're just rotating that little object there, which is the numbers of the degrees there, and then just triggering the different mouths. And it works good for kind of punchy lip syncing and things like that, but it's also a little bit limiting. This version here is the exact same thing, but instead the animation is, we're now triggering animations as opposed to just static artwork. So when we had a project come through our doors called the Grocery Gang, and I was doing some R&D work, and then one of our animators, Oscar, suggested I take a look at this. So this is Motion Script, which some of you would have or should take a peek at. You can see that Dan Ebbets, who created this content, is pretty old school. But there was a script here that allows you to trigger animations from putting layer markers on a timeline. And that was really awesome. It's kind of like using Flash. If you remember ActionScript, it's like go to and play animation instead of static art. But the way it worked was really clunky. And I wrote to Dan just on a whim, just saying, I'd like to work out how to trigger this using rotation because it's really fast and efficient way to animate. And I didn't expect to get anything back, but Dan wrote back within 24 hours. No personality, just a super dry email, basically copied and pasted by code and sent it back. And it was super helpful, and it really shaped a lot of our processes and the way we do things. And I had a similar experience with, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, but Adam Plouffe from Rubber Hose. Again, just troubleshooting stuff. And I wrote to him. I've had a lovely kind of back and forth. It was really helpful. So if you're ever feeling nervous about approaching people, I implore you to give it a go. This is the exact same thing, triggering a bunch of eye animations for this character here. If this was part of a bigger project or pipeline, we'd have a workshop about what performance does the character need, what should these animations be. But for the purposes of today, these are the ones we've got here. So yeah, just seeing it all in action here. You don't need to hear that voiceover sample again. Yeah. So So Dirty Puppet, we are traditionally a commercial animation studio, so a lot of the work that we do is in the kind of creative end of the advertising industry and some direct-to-client work. But over the last 5 years or so, we've stumbled into a bunch of sort of longer-form episodic work as well, which is very new for us. I'm going to be showing some more process stuff, but it's all within After Effects. If we were doing this sort of work more often, I'd probably be exploring other things such as Moho or Toon Boom and other things, but because I know After Effects well and it's what we use in the studio, it's what we do. So the first of these kind of longer projects came through a referral, and they all do, from a good friend called Sasha Brining. He put us onto a company called Working Dog, who were looking to make a pilot for their show. Like most projects, I didn't know how to make that sort of length of content or how it was going to work, but just kind of blindly said yes, and it came through. It wasn't a super taxing series in terms of the animation required, but it was a good lesson in building a team and building in animation pipeline. And probably the thing that I'm probably more proud of is that I was able to assemble a team for that show, and then two of the animators, or the two animators that I employed for that show, pretty much since then are still current employees of Dirty Puppet, and pretty happy to have them on board.
Sound the butt trumpets!
Let's talk over this one here. So this is the project I referenced earlier called The Grocery Gang. So again, this came in through an external referral. We had a producer put us in contact with the client and ask, can we create this amount of content in this amount of time? And I had no idea if we could, and we just said yes and kind of figured it out. There was a lot of challenges, largely because it was our first kind of larger animated show. We had values on the quality that we wanted to try and put into the show and really make it something we could be proud of. And as much as I am proud of it, just they were maybe not quite in alignment with the client, because essentially they're just selling toys and they're more about quantity over quality. But again, we learned heaps, put together a good team of young animators and met some really great people. And as you can see, worked on some pretty wild content. And it also helped us kind of refine that kind of rigging pipeline that I was showing you earlier. So back to Auntie Donna. So I met, I think initially Mark from Auntie Donna through mutual friends, and I think he, mentioned he had this comedy group, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not going to go to your awkward comedy show. It's probably shit. And then at some point, I think I saw him speak at a wedding, and he was really funny, and so I looked up them online. I'm like, oh, these guys are actually great, and then I became like a real genuine fan, and so I wrote to him and them and said, hey, if you ever need any animation, let me know. And then over a series of maybe 5 even longer years, we've kind of had contact with them over that period of time, where they've had us do, or they've asked us to do things like animated titles and a very, very brief little part of their sketch here. And it was basically free work, but I was happy to do that as a fan. We'd make it a studio job, and we'd work with other designers and pay them. But I just did it because it's great to have passion projects, and this was one. It was really enjoyable. But then through the continuity of that relationship, eventually they applied for some funding to do a new series. They usually do live action work, but they wanted to try and do some animated sketches, and approached me about it, which was really nice to see what was really a legitimate sort of fan job become a real job and a paid job. They were amazing to work with, so not a typical client in the fact that we're working direct with them, but it's their content. The scripts worked, like everything worked at a script level already. There was no polishing turds or kind of having to kind of make something, look, to sell something that had some like rough content. They were really hilarious scripts, and it was just an absolute pleasure to work with. Thanks also to Film Victoria, who funded the project so we could actually get paid for it and pay the people we worked with properly.
One of them, a little Red Riding Hood, go up to her mama, and she said, hey, mama, I miss her grandma. I miss her stupid face and her big flat bonzoones. And the mama said, well, why don't you bring her this bag of bullshit I've been meaning to give her for some time? Take this calzone, take this wheel of the formaggio, take this picture of Jesus Christ. So little Red go clippy cloppy, chippy choppy through the forest. But oh no, the big bad wolf there, and he have pubes so big, he no trim in a long time, and he reach into his pubes and he pull out a Pikachu.
Thank you. It's some pretty wild content, which is awesome. Like one of the first things I said is we get a diversity of work, and we really do. We get and every now and then we get projects like this with some pretty funny content to work with, which really helps. So this is a rig sample from that episode there. The artwork is from a lovely lady called Kim Drain, who I think actually worked with us as an intern on that very first show we did. And she used that internship and then went and studied and came full circle, and we ended up commissioning her as an artist for this job, which was awesome. So unlike the Grocery Gang project, which we had to scale up and work with a larger team, predominantly juniors, with this project here, we were able to take our time a bit more. So we scaled, or we didn't scale, we just stayed as we were. So typically we'd be working with just 1 or 2 animators per script, and we could take our time with it and really kind of still make it a bit of a passion project. Whenever I create a rig like this is the sort of movement you'll usually see early on. It's usually some sort of weird dance movement or jumping around just to kind of test all the different angles of the character to kind of see where it breaks, what works and what doesn't, to make sure that we're kind of getting out of it what we need for the performance of the character. At the heart of this, though, it's just really great artwork, and the tools used within it are very basic, and some of the ones I touched on earlier. This is an example of how the arm is built here. So I touched on a rubber hose earlier. So for those who don't know, it's essentially just a little IK tool where you can build noodly stroke things, and then even though Kim's artwork was lovely and textural and painted, I wanted to try and recreate it in a way that could give me flexible, malleable performance from the character. So at first, just kind of roughening up the edges, constantly referring to her artwork back and forth to make sure that it kind of tries to truly kind of replicate it. And then here, this looks a little bit weird out of context, but you can see there's the slight kind of inner texture on the arm of the character there. And rather than using one of the distortion tools like Puppet Tools or Duick or something like that to take the texture and distort it, it's a real pet peeve of mine when you see distortion and kind of textures like this warping in ways that aren't natural. So what I did here was I took that stroke. So if people here know After Effects or Illustrator, it's essentially just that one stroke, and it's offset paths and then duplicates and a few other kind of moves around, so versions of it moved around. So just kind of variations on a stroke to kind of loosely create that. But then when you wrap it up inside that original limb, and then you plonk Kim's nice artwork on for the shoulder and the hands here, you get a result here that is hopefully reasonably true to the artwork, but as an animator you get strong performance.
Bonjour. Au revoir. Excusez-moi. Très bon, très bon, très bon.
Cool. Hey. Again, these are just snippets from the full episodes. I implore you to, if you're interested, watch these and some of the other Auntie Donna content online. It's pretty wild. So the artwork for this episode and also the storyboards for all of the episodes was created by a lovely man and a talented man called Sasha Brining, who I mentioned again. And this shot here, there's not even really any sort of rigging going on in it. I just wanted to show you it because it's one of my favorites. And working with Sasha really made my job easy. So you can see that we would have had a preliminary chat going through what I kind of thought would happen from the shot here, but generally my direction would be pretty vague and just kind of leave it with him. And then I get back these boards here that kind of give so much strong suggestions to the character that it makes my job as the animator on this shot quite easy. Behind the scenes here, again, I think there's a head rig for most of Mark's movement, but this is pretty much straight ahead animation, really messy, kind of disorganized layers, just kind of making it work for the shot. Here's the clean version here. And if you slow it down, you can see, again, this was one of my favorite bits to animate, but so much of this came from the artwork provided by Sasha and the storyboards as well. So even things like, breaking limbs and, the posing, the smear streaks that you'll see here all came from Sasha, and it just meant that I could kind of put it together and just make some timing choices. So thanks to Sasha. This is one of the characters, Zach. So this is a very typical head rig using the tools I've shown you earlier. And whenever we do, this is again just a rigging test, so his head's just doing a whole bunch of nonsense to test out the different angles and performance. Whenever we do a rig like this, we're always thinking about what's it going to be used for. So for Zach, he was sitting around idle for a lot of the animation. And at the end of it does a lot of vocal delivery, but basically to camera. So I didn't need a whole lot of range of movement out of his head. But if you looked back at the animation from before, you would have seen that Mark, who was the main performer in the sketch, had a large range of dynamic movement. And I wanted to be able to try and rig it so I could get a high level performance and have a very malleable head to act with. So you can see the 5 poses that I've dictated here, but rather than having him front to camera and kind of moving around in this sort of range of motion here, I thought it would be better if I could get him from near front on, sort of 3/4 to profile. The reason being is if you can just see here how it's sort of averaging out between the different values poorly, but when you move it around quickly, it works. But what I did here is I did some very, very basic scripting, essentially halving the horizontal values and flipping them. So what happens is, it's kind of hard to explain, I'll just show it. But what happens here is you can see the first little joystick controller is going left and right in a smooth way. But that yellow one there is going back and forth. And at the midpoint here, the head is actually flipping to an opposite side. So if it's done right, essentially now I can go from like this range of movement here and this and blend in between them seamlessly. It's a little bit hard to kind of elaborate on properly, but if anyone's really interested in this sort of stuff, I can explain it in more detail later on. Again, seeing the rigging sample for Mark's head just to kind of test out the range of motion here. Mark's character's got this big old nose, so I wanted to make sure that I had separate controls for giving that secondary motion, and lots of other things going on there based on the stuff I explained earlier. This is the last one to finish up on here. The artwork for this and for all of the Auntie Donna branding that we've done in the past was created by a lovely old friend of mine who goes back all the way to high school and that we share space with now, called Annika Fleur. The reason I want to show this is it's funny to look at, for one. But whenever there's jiggly things like these boobs and these bingo wings, or Mark's nose, Zach's hair, and Little Red's hair and cloak, etc., something I don't like to do is to leave those choices up to expressions or simulations or anything like that. Where possible, I like to just kind of animate it to eye and make choices as an animator rather than letting the computer do it. This shot here was animated by Oscar, and I just did a pass on the boobs. So the last piece I'll show, again, comes with another language warning here. I bleeped them out, but it's still pretty bold. So it's the last video I'm going to show. It was animated by, the animation lead for this job was John Asquith, who works with us and is a lovely boy. And the art for this one, again, was by Annika Fleur.
Hooray!
Shut up for a second. Here comes the whimsical owner of the canteen.
Jesus fuck!
Welcome to me magical canteen. Come with me and you'll see some of my imagination. Come through, little ones. In this marvellous room, everything is edible.
Rim, dim. Even the shelves?
No, not the shelves, you dumb Bambi little bitch. You dumb coming at me with you, even the no, it's lettuce and the dims.
Yeah. And just quickly, thanks to Courtney Hopkinson, who helped me out with these chapter titles that you've seen here. I feel like every time I come to him with a brief from like, oh, it's really simple, sort of 2D characters, these sorts of things, I feel like I break him a little bit each time. But thanks, Courtney, for putting up with me, and for Annika for helping with it. Also, putting together the content for these talks, it really takes a lot of time, and I'm sure all the speakers have done such a great job. But on top of that, it must be even harder putting together an entire festival. So thanks so much to James and Kim for doing this, because it's just, I've been here as a viewer, now as a speaker and a sponsor, and it's just great, and I look forward to it each year, and I'm very thankful that it exists. So thanks, James. Thanks, Kim. Yeah.